Dane, you're this. It's an honor to have you in. You're this
Thank you very
massive
much.
comic, and you come across on stage since day one. Since I used to watch you on MySpace as this wildly confident guy, and I think I went through life thinking that you were always this wildly confident guy, and then I read in interviews about you, and I learned that you were actually quite unconfident when you were a kid. I was wondering if you could just take me back to what 22-year-old Dane Cook was like.
Oh boy, yeah. There was a completely different version of myself. Very introverted, really, probably overly, just always overanalyzing myself, and especially in social situations. When I was in school, I never quite felt like I fit in. I really was in my head a lot, and I had social anxiety. I had panic disorders. Walking to school every day, thinking about being in front of people.
And you go into comedy where you're up in front of people.
When I would be in characters at home, I would always do like skits, and I grew up loving Saturday Night Live. I loved SCTV, pretty much any kind of sketch, improv comedy. When I was in character, I felt confident.
Yeah.
I felt brave. And so I told my family when I was 15, I said, I'm gonna give stand-up comedy a try. I have a really good feeling about it. And of course they were like, really?
That's young, man. 15?
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, my sister Kelly saw Steve Martin at Madison Square Garden.
This is like prime Steve Martin,
Yeah.
banjo, arrow.
Oh yeah, she saw him, sell out the entire garden, and she came home and told me, when I was 14, 15, and said, I just can't believe what I saw, and described seeing Steve Martin. And I said to my sister Kelly that night, I'm going to play Madison Square Garden someday. You're going to come see me play Madison Square Garden because I'm going to be a stand-up comedian.
That's why. And do you remember the first time you went on stage? Not the first time. The first time you went on stage.
First time I went on stage, it was 1990. Catch a Rising Star, which is no longer there, in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
But like iconic Boston Comedy Club.
Oh yeah, it was the spot that I wanted to go and watch, and dare I say, could I, see myself as one of those, men or women up there doing it.
Who was playing there at the time?
David Cross actually had something called Cross Comedy, and it was like sketch and comedians, and there was a crop of guys that, would, I guess, kind of become like the alt movement of comedy later, doing stand-up there. They would do an open mic, and you would basically, if I remember, you would sign up like the week before, and then the rigmarole would be you would come in a week later and you would sit and wait to see if potentially you were picked from the pool of last week. But I didn't sign up. I just went. I was watching. It was probably my second or third week watching. And he called off a name, the host, and said, "Where's Ernest Glenn?" And nobody moved. And I immediately knew whoever Ernest Glenn was, he didn't show. So I put my hand up.
Yeah.
And he looked at me and said, "You're Ernest Glenn?" I said, "Yeah." So my first 5 minutes ever as a stand-up comedian was as Ernest Glenn.
Really?
Yes.
Do you remember what you talked about?
I did. I talked about having 5 sisters growing up. I talked about, I think I did like a very bad impersonation of like Kermit the Frog.
Yeah.
But yeah, I got laughs.
Do you think you were funny back then? Like, do you look back in the now, like you're happy with those jokes?
It's kind of interesting because I was happy with my curiosity and my confidence, being the kind of person that I felt like off stage. So almost immediately I was like, oh, I'm more comfortable here than I am pretty much in my day-to-day. And I had the, whatever you want to say, the bug. I was hooked, and I was never going to look back. I knew after my first set that I was going to take it to the heights.
And did it feel different? I know you suffered from this social anxiety and panic disorder, and when you finally started doing comedy, did you find you felt better?
I did, because then I started to take the things that I'd learned, the tools from on stage, and kind of implement them into my life. Life is about timing. Like, you can't let the girl go unless you're on the beat, on the pulse, and just using humor to get me in and out of situations that previously I didn't have the faith in myself that I had something to say. I couldn't look people in the eyes. I was really a true introvert. But stand-up taught me how to react and behave offstage.
And this success, I know you've said in the past, like when you look at awards on the wall, when you look at the platinum records or you look at the sold-out tours on the wall, I don't know how you'd keep a sold-out tour on the wall, but you know what I mean.
Yet I do.
Somehow do, yeah. One person from every show has to live with me. You see that as, quote, when I came back from tragedy.
Well, I see it as, stand-up comedy. We grew up, we were a welfare family. My mom did housekeeping. We were paycheck to paycheck, and there was always stress in my house growing up. I remember, as much as my mom was my champion and a great strong woman, there was just a lot of stress and fear. So it really came out of necessity of like, I really want to get up there and do something that not only I feel like is mine, but kind of can help other people through this, this tragic kind of situation of like, sometimes when your family is crumbling, you look elsewhere for family. And I would do that with my, as a young comedian, I would look at comedians as my extended family. They were in our home. We were listening to them. And I wanted to have the opportunity to do that for others.
And there's also that turn from, so you said in your early work, it was Kermit the Frog impressions. It was kind of joking around about having sisters. I know when you look at the careers of Louis and you look at Aziz Ansari, they say there's this point where, they were kind of doing routines. They were kind of doing characters. Louis was doing something very abstract and absurdist.
Right.
And then there's a turning point where they want to talk about themselves.
Sure.
Where they want to have a more personal routine. Yeah. Do you remember that point for you?
Yeah, I do remember when I was, like 24, 25 and playing colleges and already headlining.
Really happening, yeah.
Really happening, real, not early because I still had, many of those kind of rough years on the road where I was trying to, again, gig to gig, trying to figure out my voice. And, but once it started to click, I really, because I was bombastic, and it was at first it was like performer kind of writer, like physical ideas, notions, but not a lot of maybe framework. It was a lot of improv and just kind of youthful exuberance. But when I remember hitting 30, and I've always been a ruminator, I've always been a self-actualizer. I knew at 30 I should start changing right now, because if I stay as the tank top wearing,
stool throwing. Yeah.
I was like, that's not going to be fun in a few years. So I started to challenge myself to flip it and become writer, performer, let the performance, enhance the thoughts.
Yeah.
And I started just coming from the heart more. And it was tricky, because you get up on stage and people are expecting a certain tempo, and there was a little bit of a rough patch. But once I got the laughs being that version of myself, a closer version, it felt even better. And I think the fans were, I think at that point, fans started reaching out to me and writing to me and saying things like, I've grown up with you. You were there for me in high school, college, and now you're speaking to me now. And so it's kind of been a generational thing where I feel like I'm coming up with a generation of comedy fans now.
I want to talk, I know you don't play, do you still play clubs at all? Do you still go to clubs?
To work on material.
Yeah.
It always starts back at a club, with a new idea and 30 people on a, quiet Wednesday night somewhere usually.
I mean, it's that thing now when you show up, it's very exciting. Like, I'm sure when you were working.
Or not. That's the great thing about it is it dresses you down. You walk into a club, and I think audiences are so much more savvy now, and everything they want is in their timeline. And so are they excited? Sure, if they're fans, but then the rest of them are like, I'm not so sure about you. And that's actually, for me, I love that challenge of being in front of people that maybe aren't so interested.
I heard that, I think Chris Rock said that, like, at his level and at your level, like, you get at least maybe 3 jokes where they're going to like it no matter what, just because they're happy you're there.
Right.
But then there's a turning point where you got to be funny. Like,
but it's interesting because I've watched Chris for so many years, and I see I know his formula and approach to new material, and how he'll go up with no attitude. He goes up there he doesn't sell it at all. He's just trying to see if it's funny as words.
Okay.
My first 3 jokes are new. I will put myself in the deepest hole, and I won't try to get laughs on my first few bits when I'm working on new stuff. When I let go of this set that I've worked on for 2.5 years, when I turn it into a special and release it, the next week of jokes, I'm a new comic again, and I won't depend on the last year's.
It sounds terrifying.
It's weird, but it's like some strange migration. It feels right.
I want to talk about clubs because we had Norm Macdonald in. We talked to him over the phone the other day, and he was awesome. And he has this new book. I don't know if you heard about it.
I heard that he's got a new book.
It's a memoir that's not really a memoir. It's a memoir full of like fake facts.
I love that.
He's the best. But one thing we talked a lot about is the idea of the comedy club being a place that doesn't really exist too much anymore. The idea where like it's a place where you can go with very little advertisement around you, with very little things fettering it. Just a bar, and you sit down, and someone gets up, and he says it's the place where you can get 100% truth.
Yes.
I want to know if you can expand on that. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's to expand on it is really that's it. He nailed it. It's a place where you can go, and without getting kind of too into the woods about it, it's like right now a comedy club now it's a tricky place. I think, okay, let me say this.
Yeah.
I think that there's great comedians right now. Some of the better comics that I've seen are coming up right now. I think like this next generation of comedians. I've been there during times when like a lot of the 90s was really bad. Bad.
Yeah.
The 80s oversaturated. Superstars came out of it. Everybody then thought they could do it. Then, there was clubs everywhere, and you just had a whole bunch of people that were like, maybe not so strong. But right now, I think what we're seeing is there's more young comedians coming into clubs with already, whether it's through practice on Twitters and YouTubes, they're already coming in like with that kind of voice. The downside of that is I think so many people get that kind of quick overnight, whatever it might be, burst from whatever website or Vine, or even though I know that's shutting down. And then the problem is you don't have those years of building up confidence and having those ideas. So you might have a moment, you might have one thing that kind of like sparks everything, but that's really not as important as like, okay, now that didn't work.
Yeah.
What else do you got?
Yeah.
And so for a lot of us, it was like, I've got 15 years of being out there where you didn't even know where I was, putting together ideas and notions. So I think that today's comedians in a club, as long as that club is still kind of doing it like that old school way, which is you can say what you want, you can do what you want. We protect that here. We're not worried about the outside influence or maybe our online component. That's a great club. That's still like why you go to the Comedy Cellar in New York City, because you walk downstairs and it's timeless, and they really don't let the outside interfere with the artistry that's happening on stage.
I'm here talking with Dane Cook. He's in Canada for the Just for Laughs comedy tour. This is that thing you got to do on the radio where you say who you're talking to, even though we're in the middle of talking.
I just stay quiet and I just let you say these things.
You have a glass of water. Not to talk too much about Norm, but when we talked to Norm, we talked a lot about comedy, and not so much like we didn't do too many jokes. Like we talked more about the idea of comedy, and he's a very opinionated guy, as you know, about comedy. One thing he talked about is that I think there's a certain glamorization of his career because he's this cult comic who comedians really respect, and comedy, this new kind of tribe of comedy nerds really respects.
Right.
But he really feels like he hasn't gotten the success of his peers, of Adam Sandler, of David Spade. He really feels like he hasn't had that success, and it weighs on him. And I know there was a chapter in your career.
It's so amazing to hear that, because I'm another comedian that looks at him as like he is in his lane and enjoying, that.
Yeah. But he doesn't have the Netflix special like that Sandler has, like the 7-8 film deal.
Right. I mean, but he could, I'm sure, if he wanted to, right? It's like, it would seem,
But he doesn't feel that way. He feels like, and he says being a cult comic is not near as fun as being a cult leader, is one of the things. Yeah.
Yeah, I think cult comic, it's that thing of like, when the comedians think you're the funniest guy, that's, I don't know why it harkens back. I remember one time doing a television show with Betty White, and we did a table read, and I remember when they're all laughing so hard at the table read, and she leaned over to me, she goes, when they're laughing hard at the table read, this show stinks.
Yeah.
And it's that thing of like, you want, listen, saying I'm a mainstream comic, I'm working, everybody wants me, that comes with its, pitfalls and backlash. And then on the other side, being a comic and being like idolized within the club circuit, that separates you from commercial potential and, having the opportunity to maybe play outside of your character. So there's really no right or wrong way. It's like I just look at it as kind of a batting average or consistency. And Norm is one of those guys that he's never not funny.
No, he's very, very, very funny all the time.
It's like Steve Martin. He on a talk show or whatever, he never fails to get those few big laughs from me or the audience.
But I can only imagine that, like, you almost know not the fully opposite of that, but you know what it's like to feel, to have gigantic, colossal mainstream success, and to sometimes not feel like when you walk into a club that you have your peers on your side, at least some of those early days. I mean, I was wondering.
But being such an introvert and being so isolated, weirdly enough, I look back at that kid and I disappeared into my imagination. That's what I did every day.
What do you mean?
Well, being a loner, to kind of water it down to the simplest form, prepared me for when things started to get to the point where I was the guy, and then that separates you. Like, whether good or bad, people are like, don't want to be affiliated because they're in their own thing. They don't want to be in your troop, or they are, I don't know, envious of something that that you have. Being somebody who was so used to being on my own, it never kind of capsized me in any way. I knew it was happening, but I still understood from the many memoirs I read, like, oh, this is part of it. This is where everybody doesn't like me for a minute.
Yeah, right.
And I get to be kind of the villain, and weirdly enough, that was kind of fun.
But I mean, I know, and like your trajectory is talked about a lot, in comedy. But I often just think about like what that must have been like when you got home, and there were accusations of you of stealing jokes, and then you go on Louis' show and you have this wild redemptive moment, where, and it's this really kind of powerful moment. But I can only imagine that still just might be tough as a person.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that some things don't still kind of sting every once in a while.
Still?
Well, yeah. There's definitely, because more than anything, it's because things that happened in my career that might have been the opposite of like the pendulum swinging in a way, like hosting Saturday Night Live, selling out Madison Square Garden, Carnegie Hall, things that are just like dream come true moments. When it goes the other way, I guess maybe sting's not the word, but sometimes you can look and say, I don't like how that affected my family. I don't like how that affected my fans. I don't like how that affected my brand when I wanted to get that meeting with, producer so-and-so, but he was on team whoever it was. That stuff that's the things that affect me. But me personally, honestly, nothing will ever be as hard as how it was growing up in my family, some of the issues that we dealt with, and alcoholism in the family, and so nothing is really as dire or as harmful as when I think back to what that was like.
That's some perspective, man.
Sure. I was self-actualizing when I was 12, 13, 14 years old. I was very self-aware as much as I was kind of trapped in my own body. Yeah. Maybe that was incubating and giving me time to be introspective. But yeah, no, I've always understood that this is a very long marathon, and it comes with a lot of rainy days.
Yeah, you got to be thinking years down the road now.
Yeah, sure.
And and that's so strange when you started, there wasn't as much immediate social media response, like you kind of had to, Norm, not to bring up Norm again, but he said, I remember when I used to go on talk shows and someone would say, did you see Norm on TV last night? And someone would say, no, and that'd be the end of the conversation.
That was it?
Yeah, there was no, you should check it out.
It was probably a good thing at some points.
You think so?
Oh, good, yeah, I'm glad no one will ever see that again. Now everything is, public record forever.
Yeah.
But that's what I mean when I say, like, it's good to be unknown and mysterious for some time, and maybe, I tell, I'm kind of a mentor to many, especially young comedians, and they say, what do you think? I go, try to just build your brand, your voice, your belief system, because everybody's going to want to come in and tell you, this is how you can make more money, or this is how you got to try and fail. You got to get out there. And so don't be so interested in getting it in one click of the internet, just take that time because it's important.
Do you feel like the stakes are higher now for young comics? Like there's less of an opportunity to mess up? I mean, with cell phones in clubs, or cell phones, video of you going on TV. In your early days when maybe you shouldn't have been on TV, do you feel like the stakes are higher for young comics?
I think in the not necessarily just for comics, but because just as a society, I think we're more of like now, and we're ready to, again, kind of click off the last page, and there's always something brand new and, dazzling us on the next, whatever it is, hundreds of channels. And it's not, you think about what comedy was in 1989, and it was like there was 3 networks. You got maybe an HBO special. Everybody knew you.
Yeah.
80 million people probably watched it, and that was a low rating for whatever reason. And it was the beginning. So it's a fickle society. So it's not so much if you mess up, but if you start doing things that people think are like milquetoast and boring, then I think there's going to be somebody else that they can click over to quicker instead of giving you the time. I remember hearing like Seinfeld talk about, NBC wanted to pull that show. They were going to cancel it. And I want to say who was in charge at the time?
It was Rob Reiner, wasn't he? He was working. Like, it was produced through Rob Reiner's company.
Had stepped forward and was like, give it a little more time. And that would not happen today. They gave that show the time, and he went out there and toured and to coincide with the show, and they got those first few ratings, and then we all know what happened from there. But that wouldn't happen now. And so what would happen to Seinfeld after this big shot that he had didn't work after several episodes? That's frustrating to think that we just don't give the time to marinate and really so that's why I say it's like the more mysterious and off the radar you can be, if you can do that as a young artist of any sort, I think it's going to benefit you later.
That's why I like radio, man.
Yeah, I mean,
you stay away from it all.
My dad was in broadcasting.
Is that so?
Yeah, he did. He was an athlete. Then he did color commentary, sports stuff, and
like pro sports or
like college stuff.
Wow.
He went to BC. He was a BC graduate. But growing up, I don't know.
This is Canada, but actually that's Boston College. It's not British Columbia.
No, but it was just that whole thing of learning how to kind of be in a different form of media and different ways to tell stories.
Did you learn from him?
I learned about enunciation. I learned about to become a verbologist and love vernacular. And he used to read the dictionary, my dad. And I thought he was the most boring, weird dude ever until I started doing basically the same thing with word of the day screensavers. And I just love the idea that, one word can help you tell a story in a completely different way.
Dane, I really appreciate you coming in. Just one more thing. Like,
sure.
We've been thinking a lot about this on the show is to look back at those early days when you kind of started out. So we were going to do like 12 years old, but let's go 15. You say to your kid, we say to your sister, I want to start doing comedy. You start doing comedy in the clubs. Mm-hmm. What would Dane Cook now say to that kid?
Oh man, he did a pretty good job on his own. I actually think that, don't be so hard on yourself. Don't be so hard on yourself. I think that, I used to I was very sensitive. I'm still a pretty sensitive person, but that kid, when he started, was sensitive. So when it was those formative years, I really, really, really spent, I think my mom probably said that to me more than anything. Just breathe, honey, breathe, relax, because I wanted so badly to make it past the dark corners. So that would probably be it.
Dane Cook, man, thanks for coming in.
Thank you. Appreciate it.